Hi, this is Rebecca Federman. I'm the culinary librarian here at the New York Public Library. And tonight is the Ferran Adrià event, where Ferran will be interviewed by Harold McGree, the curious cook of the New York Times, and Corby Kummer. So we're going to ask some of these panelists what they're reading, what they're working on, and what their favorite foods are. So I'm standing here with Ferran Adrià after the Ferran Adrià event at the New York Public Library. And I wanted to ask you, in your book you write, "Let what you like to eat, tell me what you should cook." What do you like to eat?
En tu libro dices, dime
Lo que quieres, sí.
¿Qué es lo que te gusta cocinar?
Me gustan muchas cosas cocinar, ¿no? Y por esto me gustan muchas cosas dar de comer, ¿no? Pero muchas cosas. No hay solo una de hacer. Me gustan muchas cosas.
There's not just one thing I like to eat, and there's not just one thing I like to cook. I like everything. There's so many hundreds and hundreds of things.
Okay, here's a different non-food related question. As we're in a library, do you have a favorite novel or non-food related book?
Esto es como estamos en una biblioteca, pregunta si hay alguna novela que tengas favorita o un libro que no tenga relación con la comida.
El perfume me gusta mucho.
The Perfume is my favorite book.
Aún no he hecho un perfume de cocina.
You still can't find a perfume of the kitchen.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
What struck you as the most sort of poignant moment of tonight's talk?
I think it was Ferran's humanity. I mean, everybody was talking about chemistry and nitrogen and molecular gastronomy and the avant-garde in cooking, and he used a very important thing, which is very, I know, sort of essential to his whole approach, which is that he wants food that produces emotions. And he said it so many times. We spent several days with him that I was happy to be reminded of that, because really what he wants the food to be an emotional, transporting experience. And he had a video tonight which was illustrating two people eating, and I think what he liked so much about that is that it was a genuine expression of people being taken to another place by his food. And his food is finally about this, it's about tenderness and warmth and a kind of love. And he conveyed that tonight, and that was important. I've finally broken down and gone to the bank and have ordered up all the extant Ferran Adrià cookbooks. So I've got this expensive library of his exquisite cookbooks. So those are my two cookbook fascinations right now.
Well, thank you very much for talking to us.
Thank you.
Paul had the pleasure and privilege of dining at elBulli a few years ago. Do you remember the meal as vividly as that video that we saw tonight?
Well, I remember parts of it because, of course, there were 25 dishes. I don't think there were 35 quite, as was said by Corby Kummer, but certainly there were a lot of different ones. I remember best, I guess, things that were not what they seemed to be, or not what they were called. So we were served this little dish that was called risotto Milanese, but in fact it involved bean sprouts cut into tiny little pieces instead of rice. Or there was a dish called quinoa foie gras, and I never figured out quite whether it was foie gras frozen and then powdered so that it kind of looked like quinoa, or whether it was quinoa shaped and texturized and then flavored with foie gras. It was served with a soup, and they kind of told you how to eat the soup along with this whatever it was. So certainly I remember all sorts of different things, not knowing exactly what things were, at the same time feeling, wow, this is so intense. I've never tasted popcorn like this before.
And Paul, changing the subject a little, do you have a favorite cookbook that you like to cook from?
Pasta Fresca and Cucina Fresca, these two books. I guess Cucina Fresca even more, because you can make dishes to serve to company that are then served room temperature. Kind of middle brow or middle end of high-end cookbooks, old ones, Julia Child's French Cooking, Way to Cook, things like that.
Great, thank you so much.
Thank you.
What struck you as one of the most poignant moments from tonight's talk?
I was really struck by his saying how hard it is to stay creative and how it can actually be a depressing as well as exhilarating challenge. Something that really leapt out at the book. For when he says in the book, it's so much harder to be creative now than it was 10 years ago. Well, it's not because he's less creative. It's because the world has started to catch up with him, and he always wants to be 4 steps ahead of the world. So that was very moving when he mentioned that.
And what are you working on right now, speaking of creativity?
Well, I'm working on my new Atlantic column, which is every other month, and trying to connect farmers and cooks with eaters and always know what's new and make people think about what they eat and who made it.
And speaking of eating, and as we're in a library, what's your favorite cookbook or cookbooks?
Well, it's impossible to have a favorite cookbook. I turn back a lot to Marcella Hazan's writing because it's so basic and so good. I love From Julia Child's Kitchen, which is my favorite of Julia Child's books. I think anybody who learned to cook by following every single recipe, underlining every single page of a book, will always go back to that. That was Julia's book for me.
Well, thank you so much for talking to us.
Thanks for asking.
Harold, what are you working on right now?
I am working on a book that condenses the practical parts of my 1,000-page book into about 150 pages.
And what is one of your favorite cookbooks as we're in a library?
Oh boy, it's going to be tough to choose, but there's a wonderful book called Honey from a Weed by a woman named Patience Gray, who died maybe 3-4 years ago, who lived in very poor towns all across the Mediterranean because her husband was a sculptor and went where the stone was cheap. And she wrote just a beautiful book about the simplest cooking in the simplest of circumstances, but they're amazing recipes.
And speaking of simple foods, do you have a specific favorite comfort food?
Favorite comfort food? Mashed potatoes.
Good answer. Thank you so much.
Pleasure, thank you.